I'll wait a few minutes before I start. We were going to watch a film, but I think I'm actually going to give a lecture instead, and we can watch the film later on because there have been some problems with the video, like showing videos through Blackboard, and I have to wait to talk to the IT services. So I will give a lecture, and hopefully by next week, everything will be resolved with the Blackboard system. So I'll share slides instead this week. And I'm going to discuss the aspects of the Robert Brim textbook, which look at Michel Foucault. So Brim discusses Foucault in the first chapter and also in the second chapter as well. The chapters are quite long, so I'm actually going to spend more time than I planned to discussing chapter 1 or concepts from chapter 1 because the chapters are really, really long. But we'll move ahead and talk about chapter 2 next week. And by the end of the term, I will have discussed most of the book. So I'll wait a few minutes because the class is supposed to start at 10:30 a.m. your time in Alberta, so I'll just I'm going to talk about Michel Foucault in detail. And Michel Foucault is a French philosopher whose writings regarding the history of sexuality, the prison industrial complex, and madness and civilization are really influential ideas within the canon of Western philosophy. And Foucault is interested in how norms not only regulate or discipline subjects, but they also produce certain subjects. And norms also, or forms of normalization, normative ideas also produce abjection. Uh, so the creation of norms or rules, um, regimes, forms of regimentation uh, produce people who not only follow these rules but become certain subjects because of the following of these rules. So Foucault then is interested in how power is not just something that weighs upon us, it is productive. It turns us into certain types of people. The problem is that power also then turns us into people who cannot follow rules or who are produced as abject bodies, those who are excluded, those who are non-normative. And Foucault was interested in the abnormal and the normal, and why um, the abnormal comes to be associated with um, negativity or with crime or illegality. And Foucault's writings, I think, are extremely important now, particularly because of the criminal justice system and the use of the police to actually kill citizens who often people of color or poor people. And specifically in Canada, like the city of Toronto has many cases of people who were deemed to be mentally unwell or psychiatric survivors who were killed by police. Andrew Loku was a refugee from Sudan who was said to have mental health issues, and Andrew Loku was making noise in his apartment, and it is argued that he was having an episode, which could have been an episode, meaning a psychological episode, because of his mental health issues, and he was making noise, and the police went to investigate, and the police shot and killed Andrew Loku because they found him threatening. And so the use of the police to kill people with mental health issues, and specifically people of color. Andrew Loku is from Sudan. He was a black Sudanese man. And this case is one of many instances in which the kind of the production of a norm allows for uh, the supposed abnormal to become the deviant, and then the policed, and then the dead. So Michel Foucault, as a queer male scholar, is interested in why this supposed abnormal or deviant becomes the person who can be jailed or killed. So Andrew Loku was a father of 5 who came to Canada as a refugee from South Sudan, and he was shot twice by police in his apartment building. So Michel Foucault's writings, I think, are extremely important in the context of Canadian society and globally. Foucault's writings could be considered to be part of what we have discussed as conflict theory. And Foucault is interested in the ways that the creation of norms and institutions like the prison and the hospital come to regulate um, who lives and who does not. In its most extreme, Foucault was interested in the ways that norms and who is normal or who is abnormal can justify the killing of those who are deemed to be uh, strange in society. And this is specifically, it's important for Foucault as a queer male theorist, but his writings can also be used to discuss race and racism. The notion that culture is the site of ongoing conflict between dominant and subordinate classes and other groups was further developed in France from the 1950s to the 1980s by Michel Foucault. Foucault made his case by studying new forms of regulation that accompanied capitalist industrialization. He showed that as the goal of maximizing economic productivity grows in importance, criminals, the physically infirm, the mentally ill, and ordinary students and workers are subject to new structures of control in prisons, hospitals, mental institutions, workplaces, schools, and universities. According to Foucault, modern institutions sometimes use violence to regulate behavior, but they more often rely on new technologies and the internalization of control mechanisms. For example, modern institutions are physically, technologically, and socially designed so its authorities can easily observe the behavior of inmates, patients, workers, and students. Authorities may not always watch their clientele, but knowing that they may be under the watchful eyes of authorities, inmates, and others, usually act as if they're observed. Before capitalist industrialization, control took place almost exclusively through force, but now more subtle and effective mechanisms of regulation are employed. So Foucault's work really focused on power. Power, Foucault held, is exercised in every social interaction, but every social interaction is also subject to resistance by subordinates. Thus, the exercise of power is unstable. Dominant groups and individuals must continuously renew power relations to maintain control, but sometimes they fail in giving subordinates the opportunity to assert their interests. Foucault was part of a movement in French social thought known as post-structuralism. Earlier social thinkers had argued that social relations and cultures form structures or stable determinants of the way people think and act. These structuralists typically categorized elements of social relations and of culture as binary opposites: male versus female, civilized versus uncivilized, black versus white races, and so on. In contrast, post-structuralists, Foucault among them, denied the stability of social relations and of cultures. Their capacity was always to shape how people think and act, and the tidy categorization of social and cultural elements as binary opposites. According to post-structuralists, the social world is a more fluid and complex place, and people are more often the agents of their own destiny than earlier social theorists ever imagined. So post-structuralism is one way of understanding society, and we've discussed in previous lectures, we've discussed structuralism and social structures, and so post-structuralists actually um, call into question these stable categories. So the kind of debates that post-structuralism have are often about categorization and institution. To better understand these ideas, consider that many of us casually use the term the opposite sex in every speech without giving it much thought. And so Robert Brim discusses the relationship between post-structuralism, sexuality studies, and Foucault in the book Sociology. So Brim then writes that we casually use the term opposite sex in everyday speech without giving it much thought. Yet embedded in this term is a faulty set of assumptions based on a distribution of power that favors some categories of people at the expense of others. As noted in the body of this chapter and is developed in Chapter 8, Sexualities and Genders, it is factually incorrect to assume that men and women are opposites in their sexual identities, preferences, and behaviors. It is more accurate to say that men and women are arrayed along one scale with respect to their sexual identities, a second scale with respect to their sexual preferences, and a third scale with respect to their sexual behaviors, and their positions on these scales can change in different circumstances. When we think that men remain clustered on one extreme of a single scale and women on the other, when we think of women and men as fixed opposites, we oversimplify the complexity of real flesh and blood people. We also ignore that many women and men are not so neatly pigeonholed. Those who are not neatly categorized are simply defined out of existence by our casual use of language and the underlying fact that some people have more power than others to name things. So Bill C-16 added gender identity and gender expression to the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code. One cannot be discriminated against because of gender identity and gender expression in Canada. These are federal laws that protect transgender people from discrimination in the workplace, and these are also federal laws that protect transgender people from hate speech or hate crime. And there have been lots of debates regarding gender pronouns. However, one can debate the existence of law. One cannot violate the law without facing penalty, and the penalty would be financial or it would involve incarceration. So I will discuss sécurité versus discipline, then I will discuss a regime of truth, discipline and knowledge, the panopticon, biopolitics, and finally I will talk about homo sacer. And I will discuss this in relation to the Brim textbook and the discussion that Brim offers regarding post-structuralism and authority in the book. So, sécurité versus discipline. So, central to Michel Foucault's writings is this distinction between security and discipline. And Foucault Foucault discusses this distinction and the move from discipline to security. And Michel Foucault writes, first, whereas discipline cabined, concentrated, and enclosed its space of operation, sécurité was centrifugal. The apparatus of security have the constant tendency to expand. They are centrifugal. Security therefore involves organizing or any way allowing the development of ever wide circuits. So disciplinary power tells someone no. No, you cannot do this. No, you're not allowed. Security involves installing security cameras so that you are watched. And if you violate the law, you will then be subject to further surveillance and eventually policing. So rather than telling someone no, you tell people yes, you have the freedom to walk around in public space at all times, but then you install closed circuit security cameras, closed circuit television cameras, so that you can watch people at all times. And so that is the difference between discipline and security. Second, whereas discipline focused on even the smallest infractions, security lets small things go. The apparatus of security lets things happen, allows prices to rise, allowing scarcity to develop, and letting people go hungry. So security isn't really just about small infractions. It actually corresponds with neoliberalism. So letting people go outside and walk freely is also about capitalism. People are encouraged to walk freely, to buy things at all times. But the apparatus of security also then increases in surveillance. So under the guise of freedom, one is also subject to greater surveillance and securitization. Thirdly, whereas discipline sought to eliminate and eradicate completely, securite, in contrast, tried only to minimize, to seek an optimal level of targeted behavior to achieve a certain equilibrium, not to eliminate, but to regulate to the most advantageous level. So rather than trying to say eliminate or eradicate certain people or certain behaviors, security uh, puts these behaviors under surveillance. In sum, securite differed significantly from discipline in its mode of functioning. As Foucault explained, an apparatus of security cannot operate well except on condition that it is given freedom, in the modern sense that it acquires in the 18th century, no longer the exemptions and privileges attached to a person, but the possibility of movement, change of place, and processes of circulation of both people and things. So I will discuss a regime of truth, which is also a concept from Michel Foucault. And Foucault is interested in the ways that truth is produced through knowledge. Rather than objectivity, Foucault argues that the ways that we speak about something is a way of producing truth. So in the same way that categorization produces norms, um, Foucault was interested in what the author terms varedictions produce truths. So a varediction is a statement that is considered true based on a specific worldview or authority, rather than being objectively true. The term is closely associated with French philosopher Michel Foucault and his ideas of regimes of truth. So, writing about himself under the name of Maurice Florence, Foucault described the organizing question of his work as an inquiry into the productive relationship between subjects and objects, of discovering the processes of subjectivization and objectivization that allow for the subject to become, as subject, an object of knowledge. Understanding these interdependent processes is ultimately a question of varedictions and truth games that can establish the rules according to which, with respect to certain things, what a subject may say stems from questions of truth and falsehood. Or, as he put it, his work captured the history of varedictions understood as the forms according to which discourses capable of being deemed true or false are articulated with a domain of things. What the conditions of that emergence have been, what price has been paid for it, as it were, what effects it has had on the real, and the way in which linking a certain type of object with certain modalities of the subject, it is constituted for a time, a space, and particular individuals, the historical a priori of a possible experience. In other words, the question of how a subject becomes an object of knowledge is not a question about truth or falsity of a particular subject or subject as object, but rather about how there comes to be a way of talking about truth or falsehood at all. So Michel Foucault is interested in how the way that we speak about things produces truth or falsehood. The project, which he insisted connected the breadth of his work, was to illuminate these rules, these truth games, and these practices of establishing truth. It was centered on discourse and the savoirs under which practices and techniques can be meaningfully referred to in a language of truth and falsehood. Foucault's research on the history of prisons did not come out of criminological interests, after all, but rather from a sense that prisons were important laboratories for many of the new techniques of governance used in modern industrial societies after the mid-19th century. In other work, he documented and analyzed other governance laboratories, physicians' consulting rooms, government census bureaus, the text of economists, the autobiographical musings of Greco-Roman gentlemen, and the ambitions of early public health reformers, to name a few. Each research project gave rise to new ideas that are not general concepts, but whose utility is by no means limited to the context given rise to them. So for Foucault, then, the prison is kind of a metaphor and laboratory for social control and for the ways that subjects are produced as criminals because of a discourse of criminality. The relationship between discipline and knowledge is central to Michel Foucault's writings regarding knowledge production and the disciplining of a subject who fulfills certain norms. Both Discipline and Punish and Garland's Punishment and Welfare were replete with information about the practices of governance that historically constituted the modern soul and simultaneously built knowledge-based institutions. Foucault's account of discipline, therefore, resonated with the methodological and political preferences that already existed among critical criminologists beginning to find Marxism either tired or insufficient, but wishing to maintain a left-wing stance. Discipline was clearly linked by Foucault to the rise of the industrial proletariat and bourgeoisie society's need for working bodies with standardized capacities. But Discipline and Punish But the Discipline and Punish story carefully avoided making capital the motor force of history. An additional factor that explains why Foucault's work itself became the victim of the success of discipline concerns Foucault's analysis of the relation between knowledges and powers, which in Discipline and Punish was not as clearly distinguished from the critique of ideology approach, as would be the case in later work on governmentality, security, and on sexuality and ethics. So Foucault questioned the idea of neutrality and argued that the discipline of a subject produced certain truth claims, their addictions, that then produced knowledge. That supposedly neutral knowledges, such as social work or psychology, wield a great deal of power, even when used benevolently, was already an accepted point of view in the 1970s, in the left at any rate, and it must be recalled that the left was then relatively much larger than it is today. Foucault's analysis of the role of expert knowledges in the formation and implementation of disciplinary apparatuses was thus not completely novel. So, in the context of Canada, the kind of colonial knowledge production about Indigenous peoples obviously serves to create categories of people who can be disciplined and punished by the Canadian criminal justice system. Many readers of Discipline and Punish by Michel Foucault miss the fact that Foucault took the critical view of knowledge and power one crucial step further. Instead of focusing on the ways in which knowledge systems could function as delivery systems for ideology, Michel Foucault argued more radically that knowledges themselves are forms of power. So rather than arguing that knowledge is kind of a container of meaning, Foucault argued that knowledge itself is meaning, so that the ways that we speak about something is itself a form of power. So Michel Foucault's work is used by Judith Butler, whose later writings regarding performativity argue that there is no a priori male or female, that male or female are linguistic and legal categories that produce gendered bodies. And so this is what was interesting about Foucault and later Judith Butler. And both Foucault and Judith Butler then become foundational in studies of gender because of their refusal to construct a kind of natural world outside of power and outside of language. Another concept from Michel Foucault, which is one of his most well-cited concepts and useful for sociologists, is the panopticon. And in the Brim book, Robert Brim will discuss the criminal justice system and the prison industrial complex. And so the panopticon is a mode of surveillance that is discussed by Foucault. And so Foucault is interested in the ways that sécurité replaces discipline with forms of surveillance. If discipline was the Foucauldian term with the greatest influence and success in criminology, the silver medal undoubtedly belongs to the related term panopticon. Like Foucault's critique of disciplinary knowledges, then Foucault's interest in Jeremy Bentham's panopticon could be read two different ways. The more radical and less common reading is interested in the panopticon as novel technique, but does not demonize it, since from a Nietzschean perspective there is no innocent knowledge. Thus the reading would not hold out any hope that abolishing panopticons in prisons and surveillance would in itself create freedom. However, the panopticon allegory is more commonly interpreted from a quasi-Marxist perspective, in which knowledges are seen as corrupt if and insofar they are imbricated in oppressive institutions. So the panopticon is this kind of surveillance tool, and the example is kind of a prison where a guard can kind of watch all of the prisoners. And so this term panopticon has been used by many social theorists, cultural studies scholars, sociologists to discuss the role that surveillance has on society. If we are always being watched by a guard, how does this impact the knowledge that we produce and the lives that we can live? So finally, I'll finish by discussing biopolitics, and then we'll have a discussion regarding the readings and specifically the aspects of the Brim book that discuss Michel Foucault and post-structuralism. So biopolitics is a way of governing. It is a way that the state intervenes into all aspects of life. It is warning on food packages, warning on cigarette packages, calorie counters, letters in the mail reminding people to get screened for cancer. It is a way that the state intervenes into all aspects of life to produce certain citizens. It is also a way that the state keeps track of who has had children who will be future workers for a certain population. So, first, let us consider biopolitics, a term designed to capture the collective governance of humans that Michel Foucault argues only became possible with the emergence of population and populations. Biopolitical strategies, from birth control programs to social security to genocide, often exist alongside disciplinary programs designed to normalize individuals and to generate uniform, disciplined bodies of citizens. But they work at a different level, since their target is neither the individual nor the political collectivity, but rather the more or less biologized entity that is population. So this kind of intervention into life for Michel Foucault is not innocent, that the kind of efforts to count what the population is eating or how much water they're drinking or where they go or how many children people have is also, it also corresponds to genocidal programs. And Canada is a good example that the kind of obsession with a settler and how many children a settler has or what a settler eats perhaps corresponds with ongoing efforts to enact genocide against Indigenous peoples. War waged by a sovereign against a political enemy may well inflict large-scale death, but it is qualitatively different, Foucault argues, from the kind of 20th century warfare waged on behalf of and in name of a race or a people. And this kind of sovereign war is clearly illustrated in the context in ongoing processes of genocide in Canada. So the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report uses the term genocide to discuss Canada's ongoing war against Indigenous peoples, and the report specifically discusses the gendered dimensions of violence against Indigenous women and girls as being central to colonization. So this biopolitical strategy of governing has involved cases of alleged forced sterilization of Indigenous women and girls. It has also involved police violence against Indigenous peoples. Biopolitics has, in recent years, become another successful cookie cutter, with proliferating examples of biopolitics being uncovered within the sociology of health and medicine, post-colonial studies, and in theory circles generally. Here, however, we will limit our discussion to biopolitics' relationship to discipline and the reason for the relative dearth of biopolitical citations in the criminological literature. Very briefly, biopouvoir is said to be the name Foucault plans to use to cover a series of strategies for bringing biological phenomenon, or rather human activity thought of biologically, within the scope of political power. Although, in fact, later lectures did not explore biopolitics in any detail, perhaps because it remained largely underdeveloped. Biopolitics then became the title of the next year's set of lectures, Naissance de la biopolitique, given in January to March of 1979. But these lectures, too, turned out to barely mention biopolitics, being almost wholly devoted to lengthy analysis of German post-war liberalism and Anglo-American neoliberal economics. In terms of work published during Foucault's lifetime, the main discussion of biopolitics occurs in the final chapter of the first volume of the History of Sexuality, which had appeared in France in 1976. There, the point is made that old-fashioned sovereignty wages war against those who are political rivals and competitors for territory, whereas modern governments wage war, sometimes against internal minorities more vigorously than against foreigners, in the name of the health of the nation, using the metaphor of cleansing the population rather than speaking the traditional sovereign language of loyalty, treason, and enmity. The governmentality lectures developed this point somewhat, as did the previous 1976 set of lectures, Society Must Be Defended. So governmentality is also a key term from Foucault's lectures. The offhand remark about the panopticon in the governmentality lectures shows that for Foucault there is no one-to-one relation between a particular architectural technique and discipline as such, and that more generally, modes of power knowledge are highly mobile, flexible, creative, and historically variable. As Paul Vane has repeatedly reminded us, in the end, for Foucault, it is actual practices of governance that are the object of analysis, not generalized notions, such as discipline, that have much heuristic utility but are inherently oversimplified. So finally I'll finish, there is time, so I'll finish with Homo sacer. Homo sacer is a concept from Giorgio Agamben, and it relates to Foucault in the sense that it is about sovereign power. So Foucault is interested in how sovereign power can enact securitization against us in the form of, say, security cameras or police. And Giorgio Agamben is interested in how sovereign power can actually take one's life. And so the example Agamben gives is the king, who is a kind of aristocrat who can behead the public. And this is kind of an old example, but the example then that Agamben wants to use is the treatment of migrants and refugees who can be deported. And so Giorgio Agamben is interested in how the sovereign power can turn someone into a homo sacer. And homo sacer is this term that he uses to refer to those who can be reduced to bare life, to just matter itself, to a person who does not have a passport, does not have any claim to a state. And so a stateless person then is reduced, in Agamben's writing, to bare life. Nevertheless, biopolitics too can become a victim of its own success, as is happening in circles influenced by Agamben's ahistorical approach to questions of sovereignty and the right of death. In addition, to properly deploy biopolitics to analyze some of today's ethic identifications, one would have to think hard about the ways in which cultural essences have in many instances replaced biological knowledges. In general, the post-war II shift away from biological dividing lines and towards cultural explanations of differences among groups, example the rise of cultures of poverty arguments and more recently cultural difference discourse, suggests that biopolitics, while remaining useful, may need adjusting and revising. Biological knowledges are no longer the main resource of drawing essentialized distinctions among human groups. So this kind of turn away from biology to culture is really important in questions of deportation and the denial of rights of citizens, that one is not just biologized as an undesirable, they can be subject to state securitization, deportation, and death because they are not part of the dominant religious order or linguistic group, in the case of many stateless people. So finally, I will finish with this quote by Michel Foucault. People know what they do. Frequently, they know why they do what they do. But what they don't know is what they do does. So efforts to kind of construct a life with and for the most privileged people are efforts to support one's own capitalist interests and one's own self-interest. However, what does this do to others and to one's own ethical claims or claims to morality? So that's all. Do you have any questions or comments regarding the Brim textbook or the readings? There will be a recording of the lecture. I started a few minutes early, but there's a recording of it as well. So the test will be posted on Blackboard next week, and it will be short answer format. So you'll be given a series of concepts from both the readings and the lectures, from the Brim textbook and my lectures, and you will be asked to define these concepts in short answer format. So that will be the test, and I will post the questions online next week, and you'll have a week to answer. Yes, I will on Friday, tomorrow, I will send you both the recorded lectures and the slides. So I'll send these things in messages. So hopefully the class has been interesting up until now. We've discussed, to kind of summarize, we've talked about social structures in detail, and we've also discussed 4 different kinds of sociological theory that is quite popular, and I've drawn on the Brim book to discuss symbolic interactionism, functionalism, post-structuralism, and Marxism or conflict theory. There's just one test, and I will post the questions online next week, and you will be given a week to answer the test questions. So we discussed conflict theory then in detail, and I specifically looked at Marxism and feminism, and now the writings of Michel Foucault as a conflict theory. It will be 1 week, so the test will be posted on the 25th, and you will have until the 1st of February to submit the answers. Any questions? We will have a class on Thursday as well. You will have 1 week to submit the test answers on Blackboard. No, you will have a full week, so it's a take-home test. What details would you like about the assignments? You will be given the test 1 week in advance, so you'll see the questions, and then you will be asked to define the concepts in short answer format. So for example, if you were asked to define biopolitics, you're asked to give a short answer from the lectures or from the Robert Brim textbook. There are a lot of concepts that we've discussed, and so you can consult the PowerPoints and the textbook to answer the questions. Are there any other questions? Like the concepts, so some of the concepts thus far, if you want to familiarize yourself with them now, have been social structures, symbolic interactionism, functionalism, Marxism, feminism, post-structuralism. There's been a lot of concepts just from introductory chapters of this book. Biopolitics, biopower, conflict theory. So these are some concepts, and then you will be asked to give a short definition, say a minimum of 3 sentences to define these concepts. Yes, 1 week. And you are asked to cite your sources. The sources will obviously be the Robert Brim textbook and my lecture slides, so you are asked to cite your sources using a recognized method of citation. So please write in an academic manner and use a recognized system of scholarly citations such as Chicago MLA or APA format. And you can choose whether you want to use Chicago MLA, this is Chicago MLA, so it would be Brim and then the year. So that's Chicago MLA. But APA is also fine, yeah. APA is footnotes. And you're asked to write in a scholarly manner, so try to use spell check or edit your answers before you submit them. And try to write you're asked to write in full sentences rather than just point form. Are there any other questions about the test? Yes. Please cite all sources using in-text citations and include a works cited. Yes. Any other questions? I hope the class has been enjoyable up till now. We'll discuss the Brim book in more detail, and in the lectures I'll take aspects of Brim's textbook and I will look at them in detail. So the lecture won't really summarize Brim's work. I will just take certain aspects of his book or concepts he discusses, and I will then construct a full lecture around these ideas, like this week, which was about Michel Foucault. So if you look at the Brim book, he does discuss Foucault as an example of post-structuralism, and Brim looks at the relationship between post-structuralism and queer theory and studies of sexuality. So I've looked at that writing, and then I wanted to discuss Michel Foucault's work with you in greater detail because he is one of the most well-cited scholars of our time. And his work is useful in thinking about the criminal justice system, and it is also useful in thinking about queer theory and feminism. There's only one test. It's just one test. So there will be one test, and I will post it online next Thursday, and then you will have 1 week to complete the answers. It will be chapter 1 and 2. You will be tested on both chapter 1 and 2. There's just one assignment. Any other questions? in terms of the writing, you can use your own words when defining the concepts. You can also use direct quotes from the textbook if you choose to. As long as the answer is correct, then you can either paraphrase from the textbook or you can use direct quotes as well. And anything else? I guess please be mindful of grammar when you're writing as well. And as I said, you can use spell check. There is no maximum limit of writing, so if you want to write a longer answer than one paragraph, you can. Please only choose, so you'll be given a list of, say, I think it's 7 concepts, and you will be asked to define 4, 4 or 5. I think only 4. But the point is, you're only asked to define 4 concepts, and so please don't define all of the concepts. You can repeat certain information. So, for example, if you're asked to define conflict theory, and then you're also asked to define Marxism, the information can be repetitive. As long as the answer is correct, that is fine. So hopefully it won't be too stressful. You will have a week to complete the test. And you will see the questions in advance, and they will be from both the textbook and the lecture slides. So if you're going to cite the lecture slides, again, please cite them using Chicago MLA or APA. And the only other, like all the information can be found in the textbook as well, but if you use any other sources, please cite them using an academic method of citation. The test, if you look at the syllabus, all of the marks that you're given are for tests. So there are a whole series of tests. The mark breakdown is on the course outline. So you are not given a mark for participation in the class because it is a synchronous and asynchronous class, meaning that some of the students cannot attend this synchronous class, so they are watching the recorded lectures, which I will send everyone. So you are only given marks for these standardized tests. You're welcome. Any other questions? Yes, the tests will be similar. They will just be short answer and multiple choice as well. But this first test is only short answer. Yes, on Friday I will actually send you messages, and I will send you both lecture slides from this week and the recordings. So every Friday you should receive the week's lecture recordings in PowerPoint. So in case if you cannot stay for the full class, then you can watch or listen to the recordings. You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to end the class. Yes, you can cite the slides as well, of course. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to end the class because time is up and I have another meeting with someone from the class after this. And please contact me if you would like to set up a Zoom meeting for separate office hours as well. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for your participation. Thank you. Goodbye.